once you come off the tour as a coach and you spend a long period of time coaching some of the world's best, what you're trying to do is you try and get all the best characteristics of the best players and try and understand what you need to instill into your junior athletes. So sort of try to formulate the most important ones that I think pretty much most important for a junior athlete and will hold them in really good stead moving forward. So no particular order. Obviously, I really want to make sure that there's no order because I think they're all as important as each other. But I'm going to list the 10 most important characteristics, and then I'll go through each individually and obviously really break it down. But in no particular order, my top 10 most important characteristics to develop in a junior tennis player are. So the first one is thinking. So the decision-making and problem solving. So tennis is a sport where you're pretty much making like constant decisions. You're always having to think about what's happening every single shot, every single point. You've got generally not much coaching going on. Obviously now the rules have changed slightly at the highest level, but at junior level it hasn't. So, we need to make sure we teach really good processes around thinking and problem solving. Number 2 is perception. The ability for a player to read the game is critical. The game is so adaptive, so the perceptual skills of reading the ball, reading the game, anticipatory skills come into that as well. So that's number 2. Number 3 is movement. So a game of high movement, high positioning, everything's on the move, nothing's stationary, adaptable kind of play. Number 4 is compete. Developing compete in everything that we do. So, you're always playing points, competing at the highest level. So that's an important one. This is a really contentious one, but winning as our number 6 point. Number 5 point, winning is a critical element and learning how to win is a critical component. 6 is confidence. So, teaching people and players to become confident within themselves. 7, consistency. Now, consistency in the ball and also in your behaviors on a day-to-day basis. Resilience. We're always going to have setbacks in the game. So understanding that resilience is a really key factor of having the ability to bounce back. 9 is defense. So I'm a defense first coach, developing the defensive skills of athletes, and I'll dive into that a little bit more. And number 10 is standards. So standards of practice, standards of play, standards of behavior, that entails everything. So they're the 10 key points. I'll go through them again. Thinking, perception, movement, competing, winning, confidence, consistency, resilience, defensive skills, and standards. So I'm going to go through that list individually, Connor, and obviously to the group that's in front of us as well. If anyone has any questions based upon what we are talking about today, put them in the chat room. Connor, if you've got questions as well, please feel free to jump in and dive into it. So, all right, we're going to start with number 1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through the key point. And I'm also going to talk about why I think it's critical and also how to train it. And I think they're the 2 most important things to follow up with this conversation. So the first important point is obviously thinking. And when I talk about thinking, I talk about decision-making and problem solving. In the game of tennis, 25% of the actual match time is hitting the ball. 75% of the match time is in between points, in between games, in between sets. So when we talk about developing thinking, we've got to develop the skill of thinking. Now, a lot of coaches or a lot of parents will say to their kids, don't think too much, or, just play more on instinct. But the matter of fact is there's a lot of time to think. So we've got to teach players how to do that, when to let go of points, when to hang on to things, what routines entail, what to think through those routines, etc. How do we practice thinking? Well, the biggest thing is that everything that you do in training should replicate a match. So point play, decision-making within where do I hit it, how do I hit it there. Even if you're doing a fed ball drill, there should be an element of this is what you're trying to do. This is how it relates to a match. So we're trying to relate everything that we do to the specificity of what matches bring. And I think that if we can do that in everything that we do, we are training the habit. So once they get to tournaments or matches, it kind of becomes second nature. And I think the biggest one is to always ask questions. If you want to train thinking, don't tell as a coach. You've got to promote the avenue of questioning, and indirect communication with your athletes to allow them to think for themselves rather than the coach or the parent thinking for them. So, if anyone's got any questions on thinking, I'm happy to take them now.
Yeah, so I've got a question that pops up straight away, and I mean, this is a whole topic in and of itself. But I've heard you talk about to your players, okay, here's what you should sort of be thinking about before you step up to the line to serve. Here's what you should be thinking about before you're returning a ball. Here's what you should be thinking about at change of end. Can you quickly touch on some of those areas, whether you're serving, returning on key points, what players should actually be thinking about in those moments?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there's three key elements I focus in on, and that's when you're serving, when you're returning, and when the ball's in play after the first four shots. Now, when you're serving, obviously you want to think about, where am I serving? How am I serving there? And then what I want to do next. And I think that's the key element of thinking, pre-serve. You may even think about what has worked. If it's a big point, where have you won most of your points? Where do you need to serve to? Is there forehand return breaking down? Is the high backhand slow return breaking down? Where do I need to go? How am I going to get a first strike on the ball? When you're returning, you're thinking about the same sorts of things. Where am I going to return the ball? And what am I going to try and do next? So return through the middle and look for my forehand. Return to the patterns cross court and look to try and get the ball into a lateral point, or trying to get the ball into the ad corner, wherever you want to try and go. Obviously, you're defending first serve, but then you might be more offensive on the second serve. And when the ball's in play, now this is a really key element, because when the ball's in play, you want to think about, how do I want this point to be played out? Now, you don't want to try and think this as the point's going. You want it to pre-think. So it's like, when the ball's in play, I'm a counter puncher. I want to lengthen out the rally. I want to play lateral. I want to keep the ball in play longer than the opponent make a mistake. That's probably the element we look for. So everything that we do requires us to think our way through it, and understand that that's what we want to do. People will then come at me and say, yeah, but I don't want to think too much. I want to play an instinct. Perfect. But how do you play an instinct if you haven't trained it? Train the habit to be able to play the match on instinct. And if we can learn to do that, we're going to be so much better. Hope that answers your question, dude.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do have another question as well. And I realize that if we keep going this in depth, we might not get through all 10 today, but we can actually do a part one and a part two if we need to.
Yeah.
I guess what comes to mind with the thinking is players. I've obviously read your new book, Mastering Tennis Tactics, and certain game styles lead more to playing instinctually than other game styles, right? For example, if you are an all-court player, you might need to think a little bit more. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, with an all-court player, you've got more tools in your toolkit and in your armor to be able to then, defeat the opponent. So you definitely will think a little bit more at times in other game styles. If you're a big server or an aggressive baseliner, you just want to see ball, hit ball, right? You just want to go. Serve volleyers might be more constructive. Slide it out wide, volley cross, cover the line, whatever it might be. So you're kind of thinking a little bit more, but there is definitely more scope to think if you're a constructive player than if you're a see ball, hit ball kind of player. And obviously in the book, we break that down a lot, but yeah, 100% right. And I'm glad you've read the book, mate. I'm glad someone has, and I'm glad you've taken something from it. So yeah, definitely. I think what we might do today is we might do part one, which is the first five of these, and then we can work our way through the next five in our next session for sure. But let's move to the next one. I think
just before we do, sorry, Mark, I was just going to ask as well. Obviously, part of thinking is problem solving.
Yeah.
And how far into the game should you start trying to into the match, I should say? Should you start trying to problem solve after sort of seeing how your opponent wants to play? Is it a set into the match? Is it a couple of games? At what point should you really be trying to figure out, okay, here's what I should be doing at this opponent against this opponent?
I guess if you've played the player before and you know a little bit about them, what you might want to do is you might already have a plan. Now that plan might be readjusted after maybe 4 or 5 games if it's not really working or not going to plan. Generally, the first 4 games are the games that you want to go and suss out the player a little bit if you haven't seen them. At the highest level, we always have all the data and match vision to be able to break them down. So that's probably not going to ever be an issue. But at the lower end of the scale, like the younger kids are going to need to feel their way through it. What's working, what's not working. Every change of every point you should be thinking what's working, what's not working. Every change of ends you should be thinking about what's working, what's not working. At the end of the set, what worked, what didn't work. And we've talked about recipes for success before, but I think if you don't have a recipe for success, then you've got a recipe for failure. So we need to try and understand what's working really well and be able to utilize that as much as possible. Hope that answers your question.
Beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's an awesome explanation of why thinking is one of the 10 most critical elements to develop in junior players. And let's dive into number 2.
Number 2, perception. One of the least worked on element of junior players' development, and something that I know is critical to the skill acquisition, the ability to perceive. So we play a game, and I wrote a blog this week to our tennis menu members around tennis being a send and receive sport. Now, when you play golf, you've got a ball that sits on the ground and you've got to hit it and it doesn't come back. Well, maybe if you're me, it does, because it probably spins back behind my head. But if you're a decent player, you hit the ball and it goes forward. Now, that's a sending sport. We are sending the ball and nothing is coming back in return. With tennis, you send it and it comes back. You send it and it comes back. The ability to receive is one of the most critical elements of the game. And why, you may ask? Well, if you think about the amount of time the ball spends on your racket is like 0.34 of a second, let's say on average, right? The ball spends, say, a second in the air and a second back to you. That's 2 seconds in the air, 0.34 of a second on your racket. But yet we focus so much on the 0.3 or 4 of a second that the inability to read where the ball is coming is probably going to cost you an extra half a second. Lack of position, lack of balance, lack of coordination, lack of timing, lack of kinetic chain, lack of options. And then you're just playing a shot, whatever you can to get there and do it. The ability to read and perceive where it's going, how it's going there is so critical to the effectiveness of your shot, but we don't put time into that receive element of the game. So the perceptual side helps us to give us more time, more options on the ball, and helps us to actually execute our biomechanics as best as possible to be able to create the most effective, efficient shots we can. So perceiving and learning to read speed, spins, heights, depths, widths is so critical to that element of the game. So all of our young kids do a lot of calling out how deep it's going to land, how short it's going to land, how fast it's coming, how slow it's coming, where the ball is going to be, bouncing to, how high my impact point is, where my contact zones are. That will all help you to develop that receive element of the game.
So what's your favorite absolute go-to drill to help develop the perception in developing players?
I think from a young age, I love the drill where, and some of them have been put online with our stuff. So we will post a fair few drills down the track of our perceptual guiding plan. But the bounce hit one where the kid hits, calls bounce hit as they hit. And then when the opponent hits, I like them to call split. So as their opponent's hitting, I like my players to be split stepping, and that's their cue to read the ball from what they've done to what the opponent's about to do to come back. So that's a really important one. The other one is a bounce yes, bounce no. So when they say bounce on their side and they hit it, and they must say yes if it's in between their shoulders and knees, and know if it's above that or out of that zone. So they've got to always understand where their strike zone is. Um, the other one is reading the depth of your opponent. So having sections of the court like short, mid, deep, and the player has to call out where they think the ball is going to land before it crosses the net. So just getting them to perceive the depth of the ball. That's probably three of my favorites that I generally use a lot more than others. But yeah, definitely love those couple of drills to help get the players to perceive better.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do actually have those drills, I believe all of those drills out on our socials in the world somewhere. So you can go and find them, and we'll be posting more of that stuff in the future because it's gold. But let's move on to number three. Number two is perception. Number one, thinking. I'm ready for three.
Number three is movement. When we talk about the best players in the world, they're generally the best movers. They get to balls, they're in position, they're balanced, they've got such control over their body. So they get to everything. And, and I know one of our key points is defense. And I think defense is one of the most critical elements of the game. But to be able to defend well, you've got to be able to move. Now, look at the best players that have come through, and you look at Novak, you look at Rafa, you look at Roger, now look at Carlos Alcaraz, you look at Serena, you look at Ash Barty. They're all great perceivers, thinkers, and movers. Now, if you want to separate the world's best, they have an ability to just get to every ball and make you play. They have the ability to be in position and make what would have been a defensive ball an offensive ball. And they know how to turn defense into offense really well, because their ability to defend first, move up the court, take the court space. So movement is critical to not only getting to balls, but also the effectiveness of your own stroke production. If you cannot get to a ball, you cannot hit the ball. Very simple. So the ability to get there and to balance and coordinate is so critical to the effectiveness of our stroke production and the ability for us to defend and make more balls than the opponent.
And how do we develop that movement from a young age? Because I know that a lot of the movement patterns in tennis aren't natural movement patterns that you want to do when you first pick up a racket, right? And I've seen you teach your players some very specific movement patterns after hitting, a closed shot versus open shot. So dive into a little bit how you teach your players movement from a young age.
Yeah, well, I think the key is to not be so tennis orientated early days, and to have multiple skills and develop multiple abilities to play different sports, and then to do different activities that create the ability to move. I think that is a very important factor. um, I think warm up drills and games should all be about movement, control, balance, movement, coordination. Needs to be included into what we do on a daily basis. A lot of skipping. I think there's so much you can do, and movement patterns to me come in as the player gets a bit older and they can balance and coordinate in time. I think we start to teach um, specificity too early. Don't specialize in the game at an early age. I think the ability to understand that the body needs to learn to move in different ways and have different sports that help us to time and coordinate our bodies, whether it's kicking a soccer ball, throwing a basketball, doing gymnastics, athletics, long jumps, high jumps. Just coordination and timing is the most critical element. So, you watch, it's actually interesting. You watch the pro players warm up and they're all doing soccer, basketball, they're throwing things around, they're learning to move, and I think we as tennis players, we specialize so early, we don't learn to move. And then the lack of the ability to move puts a ceiling on our development, and it puts a ceiling on our stroke production. So, yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight to what to do at a young age. So that will hopefully help them become better athletes.
And then what about when it does come time to actually learn some tennis specific movements? Is that something that you spend a lot of time drilling with your athletes, just movement patterns, or how do you go about actually teaching some of that important stuff?
I guess it depends how much you've got them on the court as a coach. Like if I've got someone once a week, you're going to have to blend your time within that time to work on everything that you need to. If you've got a lot of time on court with individuals, you can obviously do a lot of this work. Movement is critical So everything that you do on a tennis court should have some sort of movement in it. Scenario-based movement, whether it's offensive movement, lateral movement, neutral movement, or defensive movement. I think you've got to have some element of scenario-based movement rather than just movement. Too many coaches want to close off the drill and say, just step forward, just step forward, just step forward. But the ball is always adaptable. So I think you need to create adaptable environments and allow the player to move and then correct them rather than try and nail one kind of movement pattern. Unless it's a real concern or an issue for the player, you're probably trying to create more of adaptable based movement.
Beautiful. I think that covers movement very well. Let's move on to point number 4.
Point 4. So, and a lot of people are going to look at me really weirdly when I say point 4. Point 4 is compete. Now, it should be a given when you play a game that you want to win, right? Like, I always talk to the kids about, you never ever go onto a court hoping to lose. So compete should be something, when you play a game, should be innate, but it's not, right? Not for everyone. Now, we got to learn to compete and to compete hard. It's a 1v1 battle. It's like a boxing match. It's like a whatever it is. It's 1v1. You are on with that person. All you have to do is beat them to win the match. You don't have to play well. You don't have to play perfectly. You don't have to hit 100 aces. You just have to beat that person. Now, as athletes, as people, we're wired to becoming or being perfect. I need to be perfect. I need to be really good. I need to play well. You actually don't. You just got to beat that person the other end. Now, developing the word compete or competitive in everything that you do in training is absolutely paramount. You have to do it every day, compete and fight to win, right? Now, if a player goes out there and loses, as a coach, sometimes you're disappointed, not at them, for them. As a parent, you're disappointed, upset. No one is more upset than the player themselves. So if I'm a parent, which I am, of a couple of girls, and when they lose, there's a reason you lose. Either the opponents were better, either you didn't play at the level you should have and they did, either they just played good enough just to beat you, either you're not good enough in certain areas of your game. Losing highlights things that are great for us to walk away with and get better at. Losing is not fatal. It's an ability to go, great, he highlighted or she highlighted something in my game that needs to get better. But as long as I competed my absolute backside off, I can be proud of my effort. If you cannot give effort to compete, to fight, to win, there's a problem. You obviously don't want it enough. Being competitive is, you look at the top players in the world and you watch, like I sat next to Rafa Nadal at lunch at the Australian Open this year. Last year, I think it was. And I forgot what, 2024, 2023. And he was playing like a game with his team. And he was yelling at them because he thought they were cheating. He was like so competitive, even at a board game. And I was like, man, this guy just wants to win everything he does. And as players, that's what we've got to be wired to do. We've got to compete to win. We have to. We have to fight to win. You know, it's about having that, I don't care what the score is, I'm going to give everything I've got. I'm not walking off this court without throwing the kitchen sink at you. Now, developing that in players is critical and something that we've got to get better at as a tennis society. It's not about how we look, it's about how we play and compete.
So I've got a really interesting question for you, actually, and it comes off the back of Carlos Alcaraz winning Roland Garros this year, and he credited heart in the fifth set, digging deep. He says in the fifth set, it's all about heart, and you hear people say that all the time, and you also hear people say you can't teach heart. you can't teach that competitive instinct. Where do you sit on that sort of debate? Is competing and is heart something that can be taught, or is it more innate?
I think there's a level that is innate, but I think there's a level that we can harness and grow. Now, if you've got it innate and you can harness and grow that person, they're going to be twice as competitive. If you don't have it, you can create some sort of competitiveness, but I think you've got to create the environment for that. Not only that, creating the environment's the first thing. The second thing is finding the purpose of the athlete. I've coached players that I felt are very, very average tennis players, very average, but have gone on to be very successful in the sport. And it was their ability to compete that got them over the line. Now, how did they develop that? They found their purpose, and that's why they competed. And they were in an environment that was conducive for competitiveness. It taught that, implicitly taught competitiveness. Now, how do you create that? Everything in training should be competitive. Now, we do this one at the moment where I'm sick of doing physical penalties, and I don't think it helps a lot of kids because it puts a negative connotation on physicality. But we do a match where if you lose, or point play where you lose, the losing player has to smell the winning player's dirty, smelly shoe after the match for 10 seconds. All right. Now, it's something pretty stupid, but it's kind of like, I don't want to smell this guy's shoe or this girl's shoe. I'm going to compete. So it's kind of like trying to just create that competitiveness. Now, if you can find that inner purpose, great. If you can't, you sometimes have to create it in training. But I think you can create a competitive athlete if you have the right environment, but a competitive individual that has it inbuilt innately helps a lot when you're trying to develop that environment as well.
Great answer. That's absolutely critical. And number 4, compete. Let's move on to number 5 and the final one for part 1 today.
The final one, and this is a very interesting one because people are going to either have a crack at this one and think it's not necessary. But over the years, I felt that if you don't develop winners, it's very, very hard to teach winning down the track. Winning's a skill. It's an ability. And, you know, I've been critical in the past of saying to my athletes, I don't care if you win or lose. No, that's crap. I do care because we're creating a habit here. So we're going to fight and compete like that first point, or sorry, that previous point, to now and talk about we've got to learn to win. Now, whatever the situation is, you've got to learn to win. I don't want perfect tennis. I want you to learn to compete, and I want you to learn to win. Now, how do you do that? I can't make a first serve. Put the first serve in the court. Slow it down. Make it. Margins. Body it. I don't care. Get the ball in. Not walk off the court and go, I kept going for my serve. I kept going for my serve. Even though I missed every single serve and lost love and love, my serve felt good. Yeah, but at the end of the day, that's not smart tennis. Now, you know, you want to play to the level that you want to play at. You want to create the level. You want to play at competitive level and be tough and disciplined, and you want to have the right fundamentals, and you want to, you know, develop, you know, your game. But you still got to try and like compete to win, and winning will become your habit. You know, I've got players that unfortunately haven't had much success as juniors, and trying to get them to learn to win at an older age, it's almost impossible. Yet players that have developed a winning habit early and knowing how to win, and you're still developing their game obviously during that time, but they move on and transition to the pro level so much easier, right? They've got confidence in themselves, they've got belief, they've got the understanding of how to win when the chips are down, what to do, slow it down, speed it up, you know, play harder, play softer, play middle, play lateral, whatever it might be. They understand that because they've problem solved, going back to point 1, right? But, you know, I think that we create, and in particular in this country, in Australia, we create players to go, as long as you look nice, who cares? Not for me. You got to be a winner. And if you're not a winner, it's very hard to make it in this sport to the level you want to make it at and to go to the highest level.
So what you mentioned earlier about, okay, I don't care if you win or lose, is that something not for a coach to say, but more for a parent to say?
Not for anyone to say. Not for
Right.
any. And the reason I say that is we create this mindset of it's okay to lose. No, it's not. It's not. You don't go into a battle and go, oh, it's okay if I lose. No, you've got to build confidence and belief in that athlete. Hey, go out there and stick to your processes. Don't talk about the win. Don't go, hey, you have to win. But you talk about the process of how to do something. Do you know when you serve big and you use your forehand and you work your feet really hard and you move the opponent around, your success goes up when you do that, right? So we want to talk about process-driven stuff as opposed to you have to go out and win or don't lose or it's okay if you lose. Don't worry about the outcome. The outcome is a result and a direct reflection of the process that you have. So if we can teach kids how to think, go back to point one, how to think about the match, process driven. We want to be problem solvers. We want to move well. We want to compete hard and we're going to fight to win, fight to the death. We teach those habits. We create really good competitive junior athletes that have got the ability to transition to the highest level. If you lose all the time, you know how to lose, you almost become a loser, right? Now, I know it's really harsh to say, but you go out and watch the tournaments and you go and see these young kids. A lot of them have losing mentalities. They don't believe in themselves. They're not confident in themselves. You don't build confidence off the back of losing. If we want kids to be confident and have self-belief, we have to build belief and teach them how to win. And that's our job as coaches. Teach players how to win the game. Right now, yes, it needs to be fun. I get it. I understand that. But is there fun in losing? I've never seen one kid walk off the court after losing a match, have a smile on his face and go, that was so much fun. Right? So I think, in any kind of game, we're out here to compete. We're out here to win a game. Now, we want to develop along the way, absolutely, first and foremost, but we also need to teach the art of winning.
Well, what a wonderful way to wrap up our first five key points on developing players. Thank you very much, Mark. That's about all we have time for today. Do you have any closing thoughts before we let people send in their questions for another week and finish it off next week?
No, I think that's pretty much it, Connor. And what we'll do is, continue the next five and go deeper into those next five key points that we spoke about at the start. And as I said, there's a way to do these things as well. So it's one thing to have words written on a piece of paper on a wall and say that these are my 10 most important things, but it's how we go about it. And I've got a quote, it's not what we do, it's how we do it. So, put these things down, understand how you're going to do it, the process behind it. Let's teach winners and let's create the behaviors that are going to create little junior winning players that are going to have the ability to enjoy this sport for a long period of time. Because the more that we lose them in tennis and if we develop that losing habit, it's a very easy game to quit because it's so challenging. So we want to build the ability to teach, winning habits and winning behaviors to these young junior athletes.